I have full belief in the squad that we have here that on our day, we are the best team in the country, 100%. That was the reaction of John Kennedy after a 6-0 win over Livingston at the weekend. Welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. We're looking back at that game and asking whether or not John Kennedy is on to something or if he's absolutely, completely bonkers mad. Juco James, hello, how are you?
Good. Some people might think he's on something, just generally.
Well, perhaps he is.
I'm kidding. That was, you teed that one up. I had to take that one, even if it's completely a ridiculous statement.
He is high on life, as I say. Alan Morrison, how are you?
Yeah, good, thanks. Yeah, hi.
So Celtic 6-0 Livingston. It exceeded our expectations here on the Huddle Breakdown, or at least exceeded my cautious ambition that Celtic might score 2 or more goals in that game. James Forrest got 1, El Younousi got 2, David Turnbull and Ryan Christie got a goal, and there was an OG as well in a pretty standard, solid, really impressive Celtic performance in a way, and something that we came accustomed to watching last season. But this seems to be where we're back to that level now under John Kennedy. And maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I was very impressed with Celtic at the weekend. So we'll get into the breakdown then. I don't know if Alan or James, which one of you want to kick off the analysis of this game?
Well, I think James called it. You know, he said that Celtic were due to score a load of goals. I think you went 4-0, so I think you've earned the right to go first.
Oh, thank you. I'm not used to that in my life. Yeah, I thought that the matchup was a tough one for Livingston, particularly if they came out and tried to have a go, as they say, which I don't know, Alan, what you think. I think they did. I think they weren't. This was not a park the bus, backs to the wall tactical setup from Martindale. So as I kind of expected, if they went that route and we set up with the type of quality that we still have with a little bit more coherent game plan that in possession base, that we could carve them open. And to a large degree, I think that's basically what happened. And as Alan said, we had some good finishing for a change. So that certainly helped. So the thread I did after the game, it was great. I mean, it was a terrific game. It was a terrific, entertaining product for a change, which has been not the norm this season. I think that I'm a little more cautious as far as drawing conclusions from it because of the specifics, meaning that I think it's reasonable going into the game that we could give them a doing, as they say. And the fact that we did is great and wonderful, but I'm not sure it changes a lot heading into the weekend here for the cup game. So there was a lot to take from it that was positive, but I wouldn't get too excited. Not yet, anyway.
Well, there's only a certain amount of season that we can get excited about, and all of the parts that we had to, get through in terms of it being miserable are over. So maybe we can get excited for the last 4 weeks of the season, and maybe that excitement might be ruined at the end of this week. But I thought it was a pretty good display from Celtic. And again, one player that we did mention before the game as somebody who, when he's playing in a coherent system, when he knows his role, he is a really good talent and really dangerous player, and that was El Younousi. And I think we saw that again in this game. The role is defined for him up front with Odsonne Edouard, and he can cause teams real danger.
Yeah, no, he had a super game. I mean, listen, it was fun, right? and we've not been able to say that since we've started this podcast, where we started it in the death throes of Lennon's reign, really, and it's been a bit difficult to kind of up it from being quite critical week on week. So this was great fun. This was a great improvement on what we've seen. And listen, I'm not just saying that. You might think, oh, that's obvious because you won 6-0. But actually, I really enjoyed the first 30 minutes. The first 30 minutes, we had one shot at goal. But actually, I thought it was great fun. I thought it was great fun the way Livingston had set up, the way that they went, the man-to-man orientation. They pushed the really high line up and they pressed really aggressively. And what was fun for me was not only the fact that, the effort and the game plan that they brought to the table, but actually how Celtic then tried to counter that. I thought was great fun as well. In the first half, both Ayer and McGregor completed 5 carries that took out a lot of players from the game. And the way that I felt sorry for Pittman, trying to chase after McGregor that half. And in fact, if I was Pittman, who's played nearly every minute of every game for Livingston, Martindale's post-match comments about he basically threw the players under the bus, said it was an unacceptable performance. I'd be absolutely seething because Martindale set the team up that way, right? What did he expect? And yet he threw the players under the bus. So, but let's focus on Celtic. I mean, just things like the number of through balls. We attempted 9 through balls in this game, and again, this was all down to trying to beat that press, trying to beat that high line. We actually saw some great decision making. Now, not all of those through balls. 9 failed through balls is what I meant to say, which is actually much higher than any other game. Now, what were you saying? Well, where's the benefit in failing to complete through balls? It's the fact that we were trying different strategies to break down this team, and that sort of decision making to attempt different strategies. Run with the ball or try a long pass occasionally, allied to moving the ball quite quickly when we had possession, was actually really fun to watch because there was. I guess what I'm saying is there was variety to the way that Celtic attacked. Mm-hmm. The other thing that I felt was really noticeable as an improvement, and this is where perhaps I'm a little bit more optimistic than James in terms of are we actually on the right road? Are we actually progressing and moving forward? Is the movement, is the off the ball movement was to me far superior than what we've seen in so many games, and then that can be evidenced in the fact that again I talk about packing. So packing's got, as I keep saying, a packing pass, a forward pass that takes players out of the game. It's obviously got 2 sides of that transaction. You've got the passer and you've got the receiver. So, the receiving, if you track the receiving data for who's receiving the ball, that gives you an indication of who's finding space beyond the opposition players. It's quite a good proxy for movement off the ball, right? So El Yunusi actually had a packing score of over 100, over 103, which is fantastic. There was another 4 players that got over 50. Forrest, Turnbull, Taylor and Kenny, so the 2 fullbacks, the 2 wide players and the number 10, and those are exactly the sort of players you want to be getting on the ball in that when you're playing against that kind of system. So I thought that was a really interesting improvement, because if you look at the receive score, let's call it the packing receive score, let's call it, the average pre-Kennedy was 314. Now, I appreciate that 314 number doesn't mean a lot to people. It's a bit of an abstract thing. But if I tell you that since Kennedy's taken over, that number is 432, that's gone up a considerable percentage. That means that since Kennedy's taken over, the movement and the ability to receive the ball forward passing has gone up dramatically. And I do think there's a stylistic thing there. I do think it's because there's less just get the ball forward and a lot of direct play. There's actually it's more measured in that you're trying to find a forward man, but there's better movement as well. Now, some of that might... Sorry, go on.
Sorry to interrupt. Just to explain that to anybody who's listening who might not understand the concept. So if you imagine, for example, there's a triangle going on and John Joe Kenny's going down the right-hand side, they play it into the middle, and say Cal McGregor, David Turnbull plays the ball in behind the defence, takes 2 defenders out. That's what a pack pass is, and then when he receives that, that's the receiving of that pack pass.
Exactly, and the scores that I'm talking about are the aggregation of you took out 2 defenders. A defender is worth 3 points. A midfielder is worth 2 points. A forward's worth 1 point. If you start taking defenders out of the game, you're getting 3 points for every one of them. So that's what that score is. But actually, so this sort of packing score, it was actually the highest of the season, other than the Falkirk game. And actually, if you think about that in the context of the approach that Livingston took, which is a very high defensive line and very man-to-man orientated in midfield, that's actually really difficult to achieve such a good score against that strategy. I think if you think about the games, this was a strategy that McInnes adopted for Aberdeen in many games. And if you look back at the stats for those games, Celtic often struggled to actually connect and to work their way through that pattern. Now, obviously, Livingston's players aren't as good, but nevertheless, I thought that was a real coherence. And as I say, so for me, the possession-based football was there, which I think, but also there was purposeful passing and there was better movement. So for me, that was all really positive. And I think just from a non-stats perspective, we looked really confident and we looked comfortable in the shape and the system that we're playing. And I think Forrest and El Yunusi being in their natural positions and tending to come inside. And I think, Kenny looks more and more comfortable now. I've not been really very convinced by him, but he's looking increasingly comfortable. And his connections with Forrest and with Welsh behind him actually look really sort of together and organised. So that was encouraging.
Yeah, and I spoke about this performance on the Monday agenda, and somebody replied to it saying, come on now, as Livingston, you have to put this into context. But I mean, we did 2 podcasts in a row against Livingston that both ended in draws, and they were a lot far away from where this performance was at in terms of the attacking and even just the general control of the play. I mean, that 2-2 game, Livingston were deserving of that game, if not deserving to win it. So this is how far we've come. James, general thoughts on this game and the performance?
Yeah, so I actually don't disagree with anything Alan said. I think that when I say don't get too excited, I'm meaning specifically versus Rangers. So because I think that there is a ton to be excited about relative to the non-Rangers games remaining, meaning that this is part of the reason why I argued for Kennedy to replace Lennon the day after the Ferencvaros loss was, basically getting back to a coherent kind of competent setup. And I think that was reflected in that performance against Livingston. I think the question is, and that should carry over against the St. Johnston. I mean, teams that just don't have the quality if we are coherently set up to give us major problems. Again, you're still going to have one-off game randomness, and you can still lose a game because the other team scores on 2 shots from 25 yards. I mean, anything can happen, as we always say, in one game. But as far as just kind of probabilistically, I think there is a lot to be excited about. But the practical reality is those are all dead rubber games, and there isn't really much in those games. So really, we're talking about 2 games left in the season, unless we beat Rangers this weekend. And I think my concern is more so the scalability of those positives specifically against Rangers. I'll give you an example of that. So that metric that that Alan referenced as far as that pack score on the receiving end of that, one of the major problems that we've had playing 4-2-3-1 against Rangers is the people that we have playing number 10 and Edouard, and I noticed that's a separate issue I'll come back to with Edouard, because I think he was a glaring miss from that list of people that Alan referenced at over 50, is between Edouard and who we've played at 10 versus Rangers' narrow 4-3-3. They just have not been adept at receiving the ball in space, because there isn't as much space because they're playing that narrow 4-3-3. And then turning and doing something with it. So, I mean, how many times have we seen Christie, even if he's playing as the nominal right wing in a 4-2-3-1, coming inside as kind of an inverted winger as a forward, getting ball to feet and then losing possession. I mean, our turnover rate, the lost possession rate relative to that narrow 4-3-3 when we've played 4-2-3-1 has been, a shit show, quite frankly, with the personnel. So that's the kind of thing that I'm thinking about, is that, I think the McInnes analogy is a good one, meaning that, Aberdeen has under McInnes consistently played that man-to-man marking, only not quite as intense pressing, I would say, forward, which again was why I think Martindale's, tactics were basically leading Lamb to a slaughter. in a way. So yeah, that's the context of my comments. And I think, generally speaking, there was a lot to be positive about. It's just a question of how much of that is going to be translatable, let's say, relative to what our personnel options are. And again, we don't know if we'll have a separate show on this, as far as Forrest being fit and whatnot. But so that's more so my apprehension.
Yeah. Before we move on to the boy of the match and the duffer of the match, then 6-0 is obviously a very flattering scoreline for Celtic. Did the XG reflect that, Alan?
So I had it at about 2.86, but the post-shot XG, which is essentially the XG that the goalkeeper faces, so these are the shots that kind of make it onto target, was 5.15. So, McCrory let in 6, model said he should have let in just over 5. So he actually still made five saves. So I think it was a pretty effective performance from Celtic in that regard.
Yeah, the first goal in particular, I think he could have probably done a little bit better with it. I'm not sure. It scuffs,
No,
and I'm not sure if he
no,
expects a scuff.
I disagree. I disagree. Having scored many of those goals myself, that's. I mean, the keeper has got no chance there. I mean, Forrest is really close to him. Okay,
Right.
and he's not expecting that. He's not expecting a wee dunter into the ground.
Yeah, maybe it's because he scuffed it. It's one of those ones that the commentator would have used the cliche that if he caught that any better, it probably wouldn't have gone in. You know,
yeah,
what I
if
mean?
he caught it flush, it's straight at the keeper. But
yeah,
I thought it was an excellent finish. I'm seriously, I enjoyed that goal a lot.
Well, I think you're on your own there, because it was definitely the worst goal of the game. But I suppose we'll move on to the boy of the match and the duffer of the match. Then I'm gonna judge that we're starting with the positive. We're starting with the man of the match because it was a 6-0 win. So we're not going negative on this one. Who wants to take this one?
Well, yeah, go ahead, Alan.
No, go, please.
Well, I've been fairly tough on Welsh, but I'm going to give it to him because it allows me to comment on, it's always good to see a young guy get a long-term contract. So I think personally for him, he just signed a 4-year deal this week. Congratulations. I mean, that's a big deal for somebody his age. So, I mean, I don't think there's any doubt that he's been or there shouldn't be any doubt. It seems from an outside perspective that he's been a vigilant, hardworking person this season and thrown into a kind of a tough spot. So I think relative to that context, he's done a really great job. One of the things that I've talked about is, given his physical profile and kind of his issues in the air, is, longer term, if he's going to be a Celtic level center back, I'd like to see significant development on the ball progression side, his ability to pass, to move the ball in midfield, to get a good score. Let's say, as Alan talked about on that metric earlier, taking out defenders, getting the ball up to midfielders so that our attack can progress. And, he did a really good job within that context. So he defended well. There wasn't a lot to do, obviously, given the opposition. But as far as breaking that press and finding midfielders, I think I had him. I didn't have him, but I think Y-Scout had him at like 20 progressive passes. He had a progressive run as well. He was effective in those progressive passes as well. I mean, he wasn't just lobbing up and losing possession. I mean, he was effective in getting the ball to the midfield to Kenny and taking out defenders. So I think that was really encouraging and hopefully a sign of development. I mean, he is young enough at that position that he could still develop into that, hopefully. And, let's just hope that's the case going forward.
Yeah, we've spoken about Stephen Welsh on the show a couple of times already and what he's going to progress to be. And with this contract, I suppose the better time than any to ask, has he shown enough that he probably is going to develop into a player that Celtic can play on the regular in the 4 years that he's going to be at the club at least?
So I don't know about that. So I think I'll certainly echo James's comments about how he played in that game. He actually completed 16 pack passes, which is pretty high. It's a high number, right? It is a high number for anyone, even for a midfielder. That would be a high number. What I would say about Welsh is, and if we want to get onto that, we'll come back to the boy of the match maybe. But we start the conversation on Welsh. So let me just touch on him then. So I benchmarked him against my benchmark of Celtic centre halves, and those of you that are familiar with the Celtic by Numbers blog know that I look at 2 aggregated metrics: the defensive action success rate, and then the possessions won through defensive actions percentage. These are big mouthfuls, right? But essentially they aggregate most of the key defensive activities. So things like aerial duels, tackles, interceptions, blocking shots, blocking crosses versus, committing fouls, so successful versus unsuccessful. It looks at both those sides of the equation to come up with percentages. And if you plot them, they really actually fit well the eye test. What I mean by that is, in the top right hand corner, which is what good looks like, you've got your Van Dijks, your Ayers, your Julians, your deniers. In the bottom left, sort of sad corner, you've got your Hendrys, as was New Hendry might be better. Hopefully he is. Your Hendrys, your Ambroses. Now, if you were to plot, if I plot Welsh, and we're talking about 12 games, okay? So he's got around about 12 games worth of data. So caution, right? But if you plot Welsh, he's kind of, he's in the below average segment of that graph. He's kind of not quite in the middle class of your likes of your Sviatchenkos, your Simunovic's. He's probably around about your Tourés at the moment. Now, I want to kind of, so that doesn't sound terribly, positive. So, and actually, if you plot Welsh versus the 4 centre halves that we've used this season, he would be at the bottom left versus Ayer, Julian, and even Duffy by those defensive metrics. Right. But there's one thing that's driving that, and James touched on it, which is aerial duels. Okay, that's the one thing that's driving him being low. Because the guy is, I think we discussed this before. I don't think we know how tall he is, but he looks about 5'11" to me. I'm not even sure if he's 6 foot, sort of thing.
I think he'd be the type of guy that would be saying that he's 6 foot because he wants to sound like he's 6 foot, but he's really about 5'11" and a half.
Yeah, I'm 5'11" and 3/4.
I know that because I'm the exact same too.
Yeah, I can't quite pull off 6 foot. But anyway, so actually, if you look at it, in 12 matches, right, Welsh has lost as many aerial duels as Ayer did in 48 matches in the 1920 season. So that gives you a context for he does in relative to Celtic centre halves. And Ayer isn't somebody who actually goes for. He doesn't tend to be the primary dueler, if you like. That tends to be Julian's role, or in that, or Duffy as was. But another very good stat is he's actually lost 0 ground challenges in 12 matches. Now that's pretty impressive. Now, centre halves, you remember there used to be this stat, I think it was last season, about Van Dijk. Nobody ever ran past Van Dijk. He was never passed on the dribble. But actually, if you look at it, it doesn't actually happen very often anyway. It's one of these things that doesn't. It's like, oh, I've never been hit by a car. Well, it's not the sort of thing that happens that often anyway. So centre halves don't generally have that many ground duels, and in fact, his data is also enhanced by the fact if you think about Ayer goes on a lot of dribbles, a lot of ball progressions, which means he gets tackled. So he actually has a lot more ground duels than Welsh, who doesn't tend to step forward. So you've got to bear that in context. But nevertheless, what he lacks in aerial ability, he seems to be very competent on the ground. The other side to it, I do track defensive errors. And I just want to touch on defensive errors in terms of just a bit of a definition. It is actually it sounds all very scientific, this, but it is actually a judgment call, because if somebody wanted to pay me money and give me the equipment, I could sit and analyze a defensive setup and pick up things like, well, when that corner came in, Ayer should have been 5 yards further to the left. And you might argue that that's a defensive error. I'm not tracking that. I can't. I don't have the time, and it's too difficult to do in the context of what we're trying to achieve here. So when I talk about defensive errors, these are really glaring errors. So think about Ambrose passing the ball blind across the box to Christie for Christie to score that 6th goal. That's clearly a defensive error. So I'm looking at things like that, or where you've left your man at a corner, or it's really obvious stuff. Okay.
Yeah. By
the defensive error stat, Welsh is within tolerance. So I've got a benchmark of round about essentially one defensive error every 2 matches. And you tend to find that the players like your Julians, your Ayers, your Van Dijks are kind of less than that, and then your Boyatas are slightly kind of around. Most people are around about that kind of average, and then you've got Duffy at like 1.2 errors per 90 minutes. You're just like way off the scale.
Hence so Welsh, the Duffer Award.
Yeah, Welsh is just under that sort of 0.5. I think it's 0.47. So that's decent, because if you think about the context of the games he's played, when he was thrown in against Milan and Lille, and he played against the Rangers a few times as well. So I think that's decent. The other piece I want to pass on, which we've kind of hinted at, is the passing, and this is something that I think James raised as a concern earlier in the season, and it's something I've kept an eye on. And I think it's something that, to credit to him, he's getting better at. So if you look at all of the centre halves that I've been tracking over the last X number of years, 6 years, none of them, in the time that I've been doing pack passing, none of them average more than just under 10, sort of 9.5 pack passes per game. Welsh is averaging 11, over 11. So he's actually leading all the centre halves that we've seen in a small sample, but against some good opposition in progressive passes. And that's worth something. But the thing is, he's also got a high pass accuracy. So what he's not doing is like Duffy trying the glory 50-yard diagonal Glenn Hoddle type pass. For those of you that are as old as me and remember Glenn Hoddle, what he's actually doing is actually short passing, but passing which nevertheless breaks the lines. So that was a great example on Saturday against Livingston. 16 passes, 9 of them were to Kenny. Now, you might think, okay, what does that mean? Well, he's taking out one or two people every time he does that. So immediately he's taking 2 people out of the game. And now Kenny's got the ball, and now there's only 8 players between Kenny and the goal. That matters, right? That means that there's less defensive cover. So I really like that side of his game. The other side of his game, I think we've touched on before for me about Welsh, is that the sort of the non-statistical eye test would say he seems very calm, he seems organised, and he doesn't do the things that, for example, Duffy does. He doesn't try to do things he's not capable of doing. He seems quite, his decision making is good, I guess is what I'm saying. It seems to be good, and he's physically quite robust. So I think I said it before. I quite like him up against Morelos. They're about the same height, and they're probably similar in physical build. I think it's a good matchup for him. So all that said, then his overall defensive stats are not massively impressive. There is a massive caveat to that. It is down to his aerial ability. Does that aerial ability matter at the end of the day? Some might argue that we went out and got Duffy purely on the basis that Julian got bothered by 2 big guys last season. I mean, what a ridiculous, if that was the case, what a ridiculous way to run a football club. But I think the fact that the way I would summarize it for me is I don't know who gets what, who gets paid what at Celtic, but I've got a vague idea of the sort of structure. I'm going to suggest that a young Scottish guy that's cost virtually nothing in terms of fees, just the development cost, who's probably on around 5-6 grand a week on his new contract, is better than somebody who's probably going to have cost 2 million quid on 15 grand a week. From, let's say, Scandinavia or something. That's a better outcome, and that's a great piece of business for Celtic. But is he going to be first choice? I just don't see it. But I think he's certainly deserved his contract.
That's the first and last time that Shane Duffy will be compared to Glenn Hoddle in any sort of way at all, because I'd like to apologize to Glenn Hoddle for the association with Shane Duffy in terms of his style of play. But yeah, look, they make a lot of good points there, Alan. Like it's a small sample size. He's still young, so there's still place to develop. But I suppose one argument you can make about the aerial duels is that maybe the passing stats is more important, because 9 times out of 10 Celtic are probably going to be dominating the game possession wise anyway, and you'd focus more on that than, like, you'd see more of the mistakes or more of the weaknesses if you went for a player like Shane Duffy, who's really good in the air but not good at the other stuff. So it swings and roundabouts with these players. James, what's your thoughts?
Well, I'll interlace 2 concepts here, as I'm apt to do, and throw a bomb into this conversation. So, to me, if you look at, and I think I mentioned this early on when we first started talking about Welsh, I think his upside profiles as a right center back and a back 3. So that would be his path to kind of a Celtic level career at center back, is that if he's able to develop, if I go around, and I did this back when we were looking at, and ultimately, unfortunately, signed Duffy, in looking at benchmarking back 3s, which at that point, that was kind of the supposition that we'd be playing 3-5-2 with either Julian or Duffy playing at right center back. And my criticism was, well, I can't find any other coherent team that's playing 3 at the back that have those 2 types of center backs playing those 2 type of roles. Whereas it's not unusual for an Inter Milan under a Conte to have a center back at right center back that, I'm not comparing Welsh to who Inter Milan has at right center back at present, but kind of that 5'10", 5'11", maybe 6 foot, more mobile, able to progress the ball, maybe a little bit more passing centric. That's why I thought and argued that Beaton was okay in that role the vast majority of the time, because he actually is quite good at ball progression and that kind of pack passing and taking out defenders. And you're less exposed defensively, usually with that kind of setup. So I think that would be the upside. Now that speaks to, this is the bomb I'm throwing in. That speaks to, you know, if we're going to have an Eddie Howe come in and play a flat 4-4-2, I don't understand why you would sign somebody like Welsh, right? So again, this comes back to organizational structure, coherence, you know, all of the stuff I just talked about, and saying, you know, I'm kind of positive on Welsh with that conditionality of what kind of role he's going to have, even as a depth piece. If the primary and concentrated focus of a club is going to play 4 at the back, I don't understand why you would sign Welsh to a 4-year contract. It just doesn't make sense to me. Because again, he's not getting taller.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. You're you know, his vertical leap's not going to go up 5 inches. So the fact that he's already having this degree of aerial duel issues at his age in Scotland, where the aerial game I don't think is going to become a relic of the past anytime soon. You know, so that, as happy as I am for him, this goes back to this idea of who's in charge, where's the coherent plan. Like, we're just throwing out contracts to guys, and does it make sense relative to who's going to be the manager? You know, what's the philosophy? You know, and that's, it was like the things that we've heard in that regard in the last month is basically, well, we've given Welsh a contract. Okay, good for him, but does it make sense? And we were begging, like, you know, a love-scorned 16-year-old with their first girlfriend for Scott Brown to play another year. You know, it's like, well, how did that make any coherent plan relative to Eddie Howe coming in? I mean, there could not be a less applicable midfielder to play Eddie Howe's system in a flat 4-4-2 than a 36-year-old Scott Brown. Yeah. I mean, that would just make absolutely no sense. So
I would argue that, you know, from a business perspective, bringing Stephen Welsh on a 4-year contract nails him down to a long-term contract that, if he develops to, maybe not to the extent of Celtic, but to the extent of a good Scottish club, then they'll get a lot more money for them than they would.
I'm going to disagree with you, Enda, because this has been the Peter Lawwell trap, which is we sign these guys for contracts without any kind of coherent plan, and then we got nowhere to go for him because no one in Scotland's going to pay him $6,000 a week. They can't, right? So, you know, unless he develops into the absolute best version of him, and somebody's going to, you know, dole out for a right center back in Scotland, they're going to dole out $6,000 a week or $5,000 a week. Probably not. So that's, you know, that's where we get these guys like Scott Allen, guys like, you know, the Hendersons. You know, we've had this litany of guys who were good SPFL level players that we signed to long-term deals in their early 20s. And then they basically rot. Their careers rot because we've paid them too much. They're not good enough for the Celtic level. And, you know, it's this, because we haven't had a coherent loan department or strategy or whatever we're doing, you know, they end up going out on these kind of incoherent, sporadic loans. And then it isn't good for anybody. I guess that's my point. And I hope it works out for him. But what are the chances that we go to a 3 at the back system and he grows into a right center back? I mean, I'd love to see it, but, you know, again, to me, we need a plan first, then you fit the players into the plan.
So yeah, so I was trying to stick to the narrow topic of discussing Stephen Welsh's performance, and ruining the mood by getting back into the structural issues about Celtic FC company organization, which I don't disagree with. But
yeah. There's
I mean, I'm sorry.
We'll move on to the duffer of the game then. The Livingston 6-0. It's hard to pick out. It seems unfair to pick out a duffer of the.
No, it isn't. It isn't. Trust me.
So, well, you've teed me up nicely there. Then go ahead. Who's your duffer of the week?
Well, I mean, I was actually, because I was enjoying the game, I was even laughing to see. You know, Edouard's Oliver Burke impression as the first half wore on. I can't claim credit for this, but the description of Oliver Burke as like watching Oliver Burke is like watching a baby elephant trying to trap an inflatable ball. It was very apt for Edouard's first half performance, which was just painful, absolutely painful. But I think he gave the ball away 10 times in the first half, which is very. And he averages four a match, 4 misplaced passes a match. He's actually averaged giving the ball away 10 times over the last 3 appearances, and I've got this fear that that kind of carelessness, that almost kind of, I mean, it's lazy to call it laziness. It's just because he's got a very kind of laid back demeanor about him, but that sort of imprecision and that lack of care, if you like, with the ball is one of Edouard's tells that he's just not on it. And I do wonder, because there has been a little bit of chatter, hasn't there, in the press about different clubs potentially bidding for him. And this has all happened since the beginning of April. I don't know if there's things happening in the background, but to me, Edouard's last 3 performances. Now, listen, even Edouard playing really, really poorly, he still managed to put, one glorious assist. I mean, that looped pass to Forrest for the first goal. He's still got an expected scoring contribution, which is expected assists plus expected goals. He was still at 0.7, which is decent. I mean, his average last season was 1.2, so 0.7 is poor by his standards, but it's good for a Celtic. It's decent for a Celtic striker. So he's still contributing something. But that sloppiness, that poor execution, I think is as I say, is a tell that his head's not quite right. And he was by far the duffer of the match for me.
James, do you agree?
Yeah, I'm going to echo. I'll add kind of a higher time frame issue that I can get concerned about. So I referenced, his positioning and the general issue relative to the Rangers' narrow 4-3-3. Turnbull's probably a little better on the turn and collecting ball to feet, but he's probably not quite where he needs to be yet as a number 10 in that regard. So that gives me the fear coming into the weekend. But I've talked in the past and written in the past about, it was about a 10 game period that was the best of the last 6 seasons. So basically from Dyla's last season forward, which was the fall of last season, where you had Bolingoli at left back, you had Elyounoussi fit and firing as the left wing, and you had Edouard at striker and healthy, and obviously Forrest on the right. And by far, that sticks out as the best performance, underlying performance that we had, and that happens to coincide with drawing with Rennes, beating Rennes, who were pretty high up at the French at that point. The win over Lazio. So even during that stretch, Edouard has not been as involved in Celtic's play when he's played in that system, right? So it was more so how well Bolingoli interacted and built up, and the ball moved with Elyounoussi, and Elyounossi's output was excellent during that period, and conversely, Forrest was excellent. And Edouard's movement and the space created and that kind of thing facilitated and helped. But it wasn't that Edouard's output specifically and directly was the main driver of it. It was more of like a network effect of the collective that was really firing. And like I said, what that system did for Elyounoussi and Forrest. So, and you also had, Christie and then Cham at the 10 at that point, kind of rotating in and out and doing fairly well. So my concern has been and remains, I don't think the 4-3 or 4-2-3-1, the way we've been playing it, and with Taylor on the left relative to let's say a Bolingoli, is not ideal. And I agree with Alan. I mean, even within that context, he was quite sloppy on the ball. But I'm not sure that this is where as we look forward to the weekend, and we'll do it on a preview show. The big question for me is what system and who's playing, because if we line up 4-2-3-1, it's definition of insanity kind of thing. We've tried it over and over again and it's not working. So again, I think within the context of Edouard, a big part of that high performance on the average was because of what he posted last season in 3-5-2. And if you look at his output when he was in 4-2-3-1, it was good. I mean, it's still better than what he posted on the weekend, but it's just a different animal for him. I don't think he necessarily suits that system at Celtic the way we've been playing. I'm not saying he can't be a sole striker somewhere, but the way, you know, he's been used with at Celtic, I think that's important context for a game like the weekend.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think he just going on the eye test alone, he doesn't suit that system. He never has really, and I think he always benefits from having someone up front beside him because he can get on the ball more. He can drop back a little bit more without taking up other people's space.
Well,
before we finish, sorry,
the last thing I'll say is I think back to the difference under Kennedy and some of the great positives that have come out is, and Alan talked about off the ball and the movement. I would agree, but with a specific development of people actually running beyond, you know, actually having guys, you know, these guys dropping, whether it's Elyounoussi, Forrest or Edouard, and then having people actually make runs where, you know, I mean, how many times have we talked about in the past where we'd see guys in space have the ball and guys, you know, guys like Christie just standing there looking at him and not making runs.
So, I mean, Turnbull scored a goal from touching the goal line. You know, he was, you know what I mean? So I think there's the seeds, what we saw on, and again, I'm probably being optimistic just because I'm sick of being pessimistic, but I saw the seeds of a front three with great movement and great interchange that there's no reason that Edouard wouldn't flourish. And I just think he had a terrible game. But systematically, I think that has a chance, that front three.
Agreed. Well, he was my duffer coming in too, Enda. So that
but he's not going to be a 10 out of 10 every game. So you know, he's going to be gone at the end of the season. So you know, we'll appreciate.
I'm just worried that, as I say, I think it's a tell. You know, when his head's just not quite there. It's 3 games now, I would say, and you know, he needs to get up. We've got some important games coming, and yes, he might be away at the end of the season, but we need him back to his best.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we finish up, I'm afraid the time's coming against us, but one of the stats that was doing the rounds on social media during the week was David Turnbull and his key passing. And I know, James, I'm asking this question specifically to you because I know you like debunking these things. So David Turnbull, it was revealed that he had the 3rd highest amount of key passes in Europe, ahead of the likes of Bruno Fernandes, ahead of a couple other key players in the top 5 European leagues. But is this stat necessarily what it says on the tin?
Well, this is why I always try to stress the importance of delineating between statistics and the domain of analytics, and they are discrete. So you need to be able to, you know how to take stats and put them in context to draw analytical conclusions. So on its face, I mean, it tells what it tells. I mean, if you're asking a question, who's had the most shot assists in the season? Actually, I think they had their number wrong for Messi. I think that was, I think the one for Turnbull's in all competitive competitions, whereas I think the Messi's is not even high enough for just La Liga. But anyway, I digress. You know, a lot of his shot assists are from corners, a disproportionate, I think well over half, I think, actually. To my knowledge, Messi doesn't take corners, and neither does Bruno Fernandes, right? So we've talked about and glowingly about how good Turnbull is on set pieces and how he could maybe be even world-class in that regard. But on average, even if you're a great deliverer of corners, it's just a low probability shot creation opportunity. I mean, it just is. So if you look at, let's say, XA per key pass, for example, he's about half of Messi, a little less than half of Messi. So, you know, to put him up there with a Messi and Fernandes too. I mean, Fernandes, I think he's like 60% lower than Fernandes on quality of chances. So the fact that, and that comes back to the idea that, you know, over half of his shot assists are from corners. So just by definition, they're going to be lower quality. Messi's doing it from open play, and he's freaking Messi. He's also doing it in La Liga and the Champions League. Whereas, Turnbull basically hasn't really played anybody of a high level. I mean, he played in the Lille game in the second Lille game that we won, but he's had a couple against Rangers, but overall, I mean, it's an apples to oranges kind of thing. So it's good clickbait for Celtic supporters. Get a lot of people to click on it and look at it, and it's a good for conversation starter. But yeah, I wouldn't draw the direct conclusion that he's anywhere in the universe of Fernandes and Messi.
His expected assists, and this is total expected assists across all types of passes, is lower than Rogic and Christie. So I have no idea where this is coming from. First I've heard of it.
Yeah, that's per 90 minutes. Yeah, this was just a raw number. This is just a raw number of key passes.
Meaningless.
Yeah.
It's utterly meaningless. If it's not per 90 minutes, if you've played every match, I mean, Callum McGregor has probably completed more passes than any other player in the world because he plays every bloody game. It's like, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't actually tell you anything about Callum McGregor's passing.
Yeah, so, the one thing I will say about, and again, it comes back to drawing conclusions. I think it does speak to how good of a deliverer of the ball from corners he is. Meaning that the fact that we've had that many shots. I mean, how many, prior to him taking them, how many did we have balloon over and we don't even get a header attempt?
Yeah, we're talking, just put in the context, he creates 1.1 chances from corner passes per match.
Right.
Okay. Which is great, and I doubt I'll have anyone, if I look back through the data, who's got anywhere near one.
Right.
But it's still one. It's not like 10.
Exactly.
Yeah. So we're talking about a very marginal thing here. And his expected assists overall, which is 0.37, is really good. What in terms of expected assists, I think there's only Messi in the last 10 years that consistently gets above 0.4 expected assists per 90 minutes. 0.4 is like the goal. 0.4 is like the gold standard for expected assists per 90 minutes, and very few players hit 0.4. I think Christie did last season, actually, funnily enough, but and he's not far off this season. So let's ponder on that one.
Well, Ryan Christie is up there with Lionel Messi, and David Turnbull is the next Bruno Fernandes. If you want to take one thing from this podcast this week, it's that is a fact, and there's no debating it at all. That is the Huddle Breakdown for this week. We will be looking ahead to the Rangers game coming up this weekend, tomorrow, or whenever you're listening to this. There will be a preview show for the Rangers game as well, so that'll be up in the usual channels as well. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you can get us at Huddle Breakdown, or you can subscribe to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast as well. Thanks for listening, and we'll chat to you later.